So, Frontend Development 2019, what's in your stack? Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Stefan from Berlin. I do a little bit of community work. I'm doing front-end development for 7-8 years now. Everything all right? And in case you haven't heard of this company that I work for too, it's Contentful. So if you want to, if you're looking for a content management system that you don't want to host yourself because, well, you're working with APIs anyways, and you just want to consume some structured data that you can hand over to editors and content creators, then you can give that a try. And seriously, I'm a nerd, so I spend every Sunday reading newsletters, and I love this stuff. Right? I think that's super nice. How many front-end developers do we have here right now? That's excellent. So, and my first job interviews were like that. So front-end development was kind of pixel pushers, right? It was like the real developers were on the server side. And I was interviewing for, hey, can you make that pretty? Because you're a front-end developer, right? That's what you do, you make things pretty. Today it looks a little bit different though. Today it looks more like that. Front-end evolved maybe a little bit too quick over the last 5 years, but it actually became engineering, and it became engineering with new practices and tools every curse word year. And I try to keep track of all the things that are out there, and this is basically my inbox, and I'm subscribed to too many emails, and I love that there's an email popping in while I record the video. So this is all the information that we have out there. And it's just like, oh man, I don't know if I can consume all this information and what is going on here. So what I want to talk about in the next 48 minutes is what's in your stack 2019, 20, or 21. Because at the end, it doesn't matter. But front-end technologies are evolving very, very quickly these days. So at least knowing what is out there and where we're heading with the JavaScript world and the browser technologies is a very important thing in my opinion. A little bit disclaimer. The following is highly opinionated. Angular, React, Vue, I don't care, man. NPM yarn, we all know that NPM will win the race, but it doesn't matter. What else doesn't matter? Coding styles. This is a pull request I did years ago, and I was a person that had a really odd coding style. I had a lot of spaces everywhere because I thought it's a little bit more readable. This is just wasting time for everybody. It's wasting my time, it's wasting time for all my collaborators. So in the front-end world, we have now this tool that is called Prettier. I don't know if you have heard that. So what I do right now, or what I do today, is I'm just writing code in one line, and then I'm hitting save. And it automatically formats to the defined code style changes. This saves a lot of time and work when pull requests are going on. And there's no bike shedding about spaces, tabs, whatever. I write however I want, and it will be fixed automatically. It's a little bit funny, though, that everybody loves Prettier and hates Prettier. We love when it changed our coworkers' syntax, and we hate it when it changed my syntax. But I think that's all right, because with Prettier, we have a common ground to finally collaborate in a nice, good manner. And this is James Long. Basically, James Long is the maintainer of Prettier. And he said, well, I've never used TypeScript. I used Flow once. Never used Parcel. Never used Elm. I tried that. Elm is actually pretty hard. Never done Serverless, never done Vue. And he doesn't feel behind. And this is a very important thing here. There's so much new technology out there, and choose your stack wisely. And when you're bringing in tools, ask yourself why you should bring a tool. A good tool should solve a problem. That's the main thing. I introduced tools into big code bases just because it was trending in front-end focus. So I'm guilty of this one. A good tool should keep you productive and should make you happy. So when Redux came up, so Redux is a tool for dealing with state management and React applications. You can use it somewhere else too. When this showed up, man, I put it everywhere. That was just horrible. It was a stupid idea to bring it in. I increased the complexity for no reason, just to be a cool hipster JavaScript developer. So Dan Abramov, the creator of Redux, then wrote a blog post which was like, chill people. This tool has a reason. When you're dealing with a lot of state, in large-scale applications, you go for Redux. When you have just one Ajax call setting a state, maybe you don't need this thing that propagates state across the whole application. And what I want to tell you, too, is that the web platform is a tool by itself. And a lot of people forget these kind of things, but HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are in our tool belt. So last year, HTML 5.2 was released, and this is actually pretty exciting. So I want to build good products, and there's no product today, unfortunately, anymore that doesn't deal with anything that does not deal with a modal or some sort of kind, right? But modals are actually really hard to build. It's way more than display block and display none. You have to keep track of focus handling. People shouldn't be able to tap out of it. Think of that. I will delete your account, and someone is just tabbing out the modal. That works everywhere because the modals that are built today are not good. So we will have soon the dialog element, which goes into the platform itself, which is great. So we have a dialog, we can give that an ID, we can give it a close button. Then we can just grab that, and then we have a function available that is show modal. And then we have the same for close, and then we can style the background. This is basically all we do. I don't know how many modals I implemented in my career, but this is how this will look like, and this is solving the problem itself, right? With just a little bit of code for native implementations. So also support for the dialog element today. We're not there yet, but this is polyfillable. And I think this is very exciting because this is the spec makers and browser vendors listening for the use cases that we have, and instead of bringing in another React-modal, we hopefully can start doing things that are supported in the platform itself. There's this very nice blog post describing what is coming to HTML 5.2. So if you're interested in learning more, you can check that out. And I love CSS. There was a lot of hate recently in the CSS world. So in my opinion, this is not a good thing that is happening right now, but I love CSS. And another exciting thing that was happening last year is we finally made grid. Right? How many grid CSS do you have in your style sheets? Was just ridiculous. So with the CSS grid, there you see my private website, and you see this long container on the right side. This was not easy to do with HTMLs and CSS in the old days. But with CSS grid today, we have display grid, then we can define repeat auto-fit, min-max. So this makes it responsive by default. Just scaling up and down. This is 2 lines of CSS. And for a little bit of edge cases, I can define a grid row 2/5, so I can span the whole thing. This is just a long list. There's no additional markup required. No floats, no nothing. So this is actually shorthand for this. So I think this is beautiful, and this is again vendors and spec makers listening for the needs of the industry. So what's the support for CSS Grid today? Yes, we made it. And this was the first time when browser vendors started collaborating on this. All this was developed behind a feature flag, so it was shipping in browsers for quite a while, and then was like all the vendors agreed, we are there yet? Yeah, we are there now, so let's turn it into the stable release channels. That was actually quite cool to see Apple, Google, Firefox collaborate on a new feature that was much needed in the web platform itself. So if you want to learn more about CSS Grid, Wes Bos does a lot of online courses. Highly recommended to check this course out. It's free. Another thing is fonts. Fonts are a huge bottleneck for performance today. So let me show you the difference between flash of invisible text and flash of unstyled text. So you see here 2 text thingies. And this is flash of unstyled text, so the text is immediately there, and then flips this to a custom font. And the left one is just blocking until fonts arrive. This is harming user experience dramatically. So how do you implement usually a font? Well, wait, excuse me. So this is how we usually implement a font. And we now have the font display property, with which we can decide what should happen when the font is kicking in. Maybe it's in cache, maybe it's not in cache. So we have font display auto, which uses the browser default behavior. This is also different from browser to browser, so it's harder than it thinks on the first log. So we have font display swap, which only shows the custom fonts when it's there. We have font display block, which is basically don't show anything. If it's hanging in the network for 25 seconds, well, then wait 25 seconds for the font to load. I don't know why you should use that, but yeah. Then we have font display fallback, which is a different time duration to show the fallback font first and then flip, and this is the support today. So we have edge, kind of ruining the party, but well, this is how it is, right? Just use the things that at some point, look if you can have a progressive enhancement strategy and then roll with it. There's one document when you want to load custom fonts. is this. All the edge cases, all the questions, do you want to achieve this? Do you want to achieve this? It's a really nice yes, no, yes, no, yes, no thing. And if you're looking for a strategy to load fonts, check this out. Then we have focus within. And when I saw this for the first time, I couldn't be less excited. So you can, with focus within, you can define, you can select elements that have focus in elements inside of them, right? So when I'm tabbing around there, I can give a background because there are input elements that are focused. So I saw that and was like, yeah, that's nice, but what's going on? But the thing is, with this, we can finally solve CSS drop-down menus that work with keyboard, because this is not easy to do with keyboard usually. So you can go with hover, and then it works, but when you tap through the things, usually you had to bring some JavaScript to keep the drop-down open. With this little bit of CSS, you can now do this CSS only, and I think this is beautiful. And this is, again, the vendors were listening. Hey, why are you using JavaScript for these tiny things? Yeah, because it's too tricky to make that accessible with keyboard. So how's the support for focus within today? This is how it looks, but you can use a polyfill for that. And I'm a web performance person, and it looks like we have a new image format coming. And it looks like it will be WebP. There were several competitors. It was JPEG XR, it was FLIF, BPG. There are a few of them out there. So when you look at JPEG with the quality 65, for example, this image of Seattle, this is 400K. This can be a lot when you're, for example, in the United States, like this person, and you're paying €6 for 2 megabytes of data. And WebP is cutting that in half. So that's the cool thing. And surprisingly, 3 or 4 months ago, it was like Firefox saying, we're supporting it, by the way. Super cool. And Edge said the same, and I was like, what is going on? So now it's only Safari missing, but the peer pressure in the vendor landscape is now a little bit too high. So I think it will come at some point, which means that JPEG may go into the past, which is cool. And then we have a lot of observers, which people are not using enough, in my opinion. So let me show you a little bit of code. So let me define an option object. So this includes a threshold. And let me use something that is called intersection observer. So there's this thing in browsers today, the intersection observer that you can initialize, which then is called with entries. And these entries have an is-intersecting property. And you see there that I'm switching the source of a target element to this data source. And then I'm unobserving the thing. Does anyone know what this does? This is lazy loading, native in Java, in the platform itself, without figuring out coordinates. I think this is excellent, and we've got a few of these in JavaScript, in the DOM spec right at our fingertips. Greg Whitworth gave an excellent talk about the intersection observer and container queries, which we will probably never have. But yeah, highly recommend to watch that. So what observers do we have today? We've got an intersection observer. I'm driving you crazy. So we've got the intersection observer, which tells you when elements go into the viewport and when they're leaving the viewport. This is perfect for a lot of use cases. We've got the mutation observer with which you can figure out if something changed in the DOM. We've got the performance observer that tells us, for example, when some JavaScript snippets are running too long. Resize observers for when something changes its size. Think of these kind of drag and drop interfaces. Maybe you want to adjust something. And the reporting observer is pretty new, which gives you information when your users use features that are maybe deprecated or something. These are these little messages that pop up in Chrome. You got an API now to use these. Evergreen browsers evolve quickly, and that's the thing I want to tell you. And then we have also the next JavaScript. JavaScript was treated a little bit like a toy language for years because we haven't had modules, right? Well, it was just not possible. But now we're there. And you can now do things like this. You can use type module, and then there's the fallback variation with no module. But what does it actually mean when you have a JavaScript module? It means that it's strict mode by default. No use strict, no useless line in the first, no useless first line. This on top level is undefined. It's not window. Variables are local to the script itself, and you can load other files. Man, I think good stuff. They're always loaded asynchronous, so even when we have an inline JavaScript snippet type module, it will also be executed only after all the HTML is parsed. So what's the support today? We're pretty green here. Does that now mean that you don't have to have a build process and that you don't have to create bundles and all these kind of things? It does not. And I spent last year 2 weeks researching this and looking at the performance implication when you just load 45 small JavaScript files. And the solution is that, no, we still have to bundle. But the cool thing is that now that platform maintainers discover that this is now there, and the cool thing is that when a browser supports ECMAScript modules, a browser supports also the new fancy JavaScript features, which means that we don't have to transpile let and const, that we don't have to transpile a lot of features that we usually ship for legacy browsers. So what I ship now in my applications today is 2 different bundles. This is just a little bit few more bytes, right? But I have something like this. This is the fallback bundle. This is transpiling var, let, and const, and all these kind of things. And this is the hipster script, right? So when you look into this file now, you will see I use let in production because I can be sure that it's supported because the browser decided to load this file. I'm using arrow functions. I'm using even await. Async await, best thing ever coming to JavaScript. The future is there. And I think that's very, very nice. I messed up my timer, by the way, so you would have to give me signs later. Another thing then is we don't have types in JavaScript. I feel like this conference is, there are a lot of people that deal with statically typed languages. Man, I never did that, but TypeScript is actually a cool thing. And I was always in the camp that was like, who needs that? I'm a JavaScript developer, right? I'm cool, and I know how to deal with these things, and I don't need auto-completion. But recently I was doing a pull request in our contentful ecosystem, and I really changed one signature, which led then to 21 changed files. And I was like, oh my God, you're opening Pandora's box here. So this is what I did, and this is TypeScript. So what you see there is a definition for a function. So and in total, it's the async function migration accepts the arguments migration creator of type function and returns a promise that resolves with the collection of type intent. Okay, so I changed that to something like this. And what happened? Everything broke. Again, for people from statically typed languages, this is not a big thing. For a JavaScript developer, this is magic, man. You could also do kind of refactor everything and go step by step. And the cool thing is that now big projects are going into using TypeScript too, and what you see there is Webpack switching to TypeScript. And they found a lot of issues in their code base just because TypeScript is smart enough to check all the types. I think that's really nice. Yeah, and you got auto-completion. So I still enjoy that. I use TypeScript now for 6 or 9 months or something, and having auto-completion is the best thing ever. I don't know how I could ever think that this is not needed. So when you're doing large-scale projects, what I want to tell you is take all the safety that you can get for large-scale applications. That's the whole thing. And we have to admit, progressive web apps will become a standard. They were very prominent over the last 2 years. And a friend of mine, Ola, she works for Mozilla. And that's a quote from a service worker talk. So it was very prominent. If you're looking for more information about progressive web apps, just Google progressive web app and you will find a lot of Google resources. So what is a progressive web app? Progressive web apps are reliable because with these new technologies, we can make it possible to control caching behavior of the browsers, which makes it possible to write applications that feel native even when you don't have a network connection. They feel fast, so you should never block any user interaction, which means that when you click a button, something should happen. It shouldn't be a spinner in best case, but it should be fast and engaging, which means that we can also use push notifications or things like that. And the core technology of progressive web apps is the holy service worker. And I never thought that I will show this slide to someone, but the service worker is a JavaScript snippet that sits between the browser and the internet, and you can then interfere all the stuff that goes in and out. And you can cache it with your own logic if you want to. So is that ready today? Yep, we're there. You can use that today and build native-like experience with just web technology. So how does a service worker look like? So what you see here is a service worker definition, and I'm listening for all the fetch events that are happening. And then I'm checking, okay, is this in my cache? Yeah, if so, use the cache version and don't go to the network. Otherwise, please cache it. The thing, though, is that Writing a service worker by yourself can be a little bit tedious, and this is why we now start having the first abstractions. So what you see here is Workbox that is maintained by Google. And with this, it's 5 lines of JavaScript in my service worker, and guess what this does? This makes my whole site offline capable with 5 lines of service worker code. I think that's beautiful. For anybody running progressive web apps in production, there was a breaking change just recently. So if you want to have the install banner and you developed your progressive web app 9 months ago, watch out, it might be broken. So I think it is important to know how things work, but also to use what is out there. So if Workbox is good enough, go for it. This is a little bit of abstraction on top, and that's fine. Another big buzzword hanging around really recently. I was not convinced initially, but yeah, maybe I'm not good evaluating buzzwords when they appear for the first time. Here we go. GraphQL. So there's this dialogue, and this is coming from Airbnb. They're running GraphQL in production. So there's this backend engineer. So you're saying this GraphQL will allow any web or native engineer to arbitrarily query basically any field in any basic service recursively, however they want, without any backend engineer. Yeah. This is what it is. This is GraphQL. So when I started development, I learned REST for the first time, right? Because REST is how the web works. It matches to HTTP verbs, and this is how we should do stuff. And I believe that. That sounds good, that makes sense. So in a RESTful world, when I'm building a big JavaScript application and I want to have this resource and this resource and this resource, I'm doing 5 requests, 1 request per resource, right? And then sometimes some APIs start to work around this with kind of include parameters or select parameters, which is, if this is really RESTful, is a different question. But now Facebook comes along and develops GraphQL, which changes the whole thing and switches to a post, and you can define what data should come back in this request. And when I saw this for the first time, it's like, oh, I'm getting data with a post. And then I can also mutate in the same moment. Do I like that? But it's actually really cool. I mean, I don't know, 1 request for everything. You can cache it in the client side. And the cool thing about GraphQL is that it comes with the schema definition, which means that when you're dealing with a GraphQL API, you got a tool like this. You can just go in there and play around. This is not very pretty. I like to use pretty software. So there are the folks from Prisma. They did this. This is a little bit prettier, so I'm using that one. So you can just go into a GraphQL endpoint and it tells you all the parameters, all the fields that you can query. You can recursively going down. You can restructure all the things. And if you want to, you can even change data in the same call. And it's using post. Yeah, this feels a little bit unsafe, but this is how it is. I think this is super cool. And you can save a lot of data on the wire, right? When you don't get all the shizzle that usually comes with a resource when you only need a field, I think that's nice. And then there's also the other side. I'm working for an API provider, right? We have a RESTful API. Do people want to use just HTTP to use your product? No, they don't. What they want is SDKs. For JavaScript, for Ruby, for PHP, for .NET, for Swift, for Java. Man, this is 6 developers just because you have a RESTful API. And let's see what comes next. Go, Rust, Elixir, I don't know. I don't know. So this is already a lot of people, and developers don't like to write docs. Congratulations, now you have to have 2 docs people. And this all becomes a little bit easier because GraphQL is platform agnostic. Which doesn't mean that you can get rid of the docs people because, well, developers still don't like docs, and even if it's self-documenting, good tutorials and stuff is important. But as an API provider, lives become so much easier. It's a GraphQL endpoint. Here it is. That's super cool. So I think that GraphQL will change the way we work completely when you can let the REST idea go, which takes a while. And then right now, what is happening in the front-end universe is that static sites are getting hot again. This is super surprising. There was this trend for me personally. 3 years ago, it was like static sites. Everybody was like, yeah, cool. And then it stopped, and now we're back there again. But the thing is, when I developed my first static site, so what you usually have, you have a content and templates files somewhere hanging around. This then goes into a static site generator like Jekyll or something else, which results in a website. So far, so good. But when you're a current front-end developer, this is not enough. So you're putting in some tooling for CSS and JavaScript. And when I did this for the first time, I had a build tool like Grunt or Gulp, if someone remembers these. And then I had the problem that I had to maintain, for example, templates in two areas, the static site generator and the JavaScript itself. This was the tech stack in not only one company that I worked for. And this is just asking for trouble because you're updating the JavaScript and the other template is not there. And I had to constantly switch between Ruby or PHP and JavaScript. This is not nice. And then all these API, these shiny APIs appeared. And how do I get the data for that? So, well, maybe I write a script that pushes the data on file so that it can be read from the static site generator. I wasn't really happy with this setup. What happens now is that we have new technologies that fetch the data during runtime instead of writing them to disk first, and we can write universal JavaScript apps. Universal JavaScript apps is just JavaScript on both sides, and this sounds like not a big deal, but this unifies the problem, right? I can write templates in the same language for both sides, which is then really nice. And this has a few advantages. I can write static HTML. Whenever, for example, a blog project, and you're showing a spinner first, you're not doing a good user experience. It is a unified code base. We reached a good spot these days, I think. JavaScript tooling is pretty nice. Hot reloading and all these kind of things is nice. NPM is right now, I think, the biggest package manager out there. There's always a package for everything. And we can use cutting-edge technologies. I sat down for a while and I wrote about what I think about this if you want to read more about that. And then we have these new tools out there. So we have Next.js, which is developed by a San Francisco company that is called Zeit, so German name. Then we have the Vue ecosystem, just trolling the Next folks, just to confuse everybody. So we have Next and Nuxt, more or less the same thing, but Vue and React. And then we have Gatsby, and Gatsby is a little bit an interesting one. Gatsby works with React, it ships progressive web apps really easily, and it bets on GraphQL. And the interesting thing is that Gatsby brings in its own caching layer, so it doesn't matter which APIs you connect, it figures out a way to generate all the files, and you can deploy that just to a CDN. So you define the sources up front, and then it cuts the connection, and they call this a content mesh. So whatever, they have adapters for every content source you have out there. During the build time, they generate all the JSON files, and then you can just put it on S3 or whatever you want to use. So the thing I want to tell you here is, even when this is all cutting-edge front-end, you don't have to ship always 300, 400K of JavaScript, right? I think that every website is a web app, and every web app is a website. But always have a look at how much you're shipping. And if it is needed to ship 300K when it's just a blog with 500 words, maybe not. So then the tooling in front-end world evolved, it evolved, and evolved, until it was not handleable anymore, right? So there's another trend going on that is zero-conflict JavaScript. And that is actually an interesting one. So we have bundlers, right? You cannot ship several files, as I said already. You don't want to ship 30 files, 50 files of JavaScript. This messes up gzip compression, all these kind of things. And the tool that won the race is actually Webpack. Webpack was almost dead 4 years ago because it lost all its maintainers, but now it's the first choice. But Webpack got a little bit out of hand so that people started making jokes out of it. So when you look around, so people call themselves Senior Webpack Config Manager, or Executive Webpack Configuration Engineer. Tweets like this are everywhere. And when you're maintaining or creating a tool that gets so much out of hand, what happens is that competition starts. And this is Parcel, and Parcel sits on top of Webpack, and I'm feeling spontaneous, and I'm demoing that, so let's see how this works. Does it work? Nice. All right, so what you see is a directory that only includes an index.html file, and I'm creating a few JavaScript files here. So, that's the wrong window. Here we go. Is that big enough? Bigger? Smaller? Bigger, huh? Like this? Okay, so all what this HTML file does is it loads this index.js file, right? So let's fill that with life. And I'm using ES modules here, so let's do import main from main.js, and let's execute this. And I'm using prettier, right? So I'm not using semicolons. I'm 100% a semicolon person, but I'm not typing that anymore. So what we can do now is export default, and we're returning an error function. Let's create an element, document, create element div. Let's give it a class, foo. Let's give it some content. Hello, people. And let's add this to the DOM. Append child, oops, lm. So but this is now a little bit boring, so let's import some styles. What is that, main CSS? Sweet. Let's go here. And background, magenta. And color, right. So this is basically it. So far so good. Any typos somewhere? And I'm always super scared when I do this. So let's see. All I do is I'm executing parcel, and when I'm lucky, and I didn't have a typo, I can actually refresh this page. And I got a nice CSS bundle and a nice JavaScript bundle. This is perfect for prototyping. This is, do you know how often I sit on my couch, I want to do a quick project, and I'm like, okay, what do you use for tooling? Do you use this? Do you use Babel? Webpack? TypeScript? This is perfect when you just want to kickstart a project. All right, so let's go back. And let's go here. Okay. So what you just saw is that I have one HTML file that references one JavaScript file. It figures out, okay, there's a CSS file hanging around, and another JavaScript, and it's resolving all the dependencies. And this works with TypeScript and Sass and all this stuff. You just use it. I think that's beautiful. So when you have a tool that got out of hand and competition started, what's happened? Well, you have to improve. So Sean Larkin, he is maintaining Webpack. He was like, yeah, we will improve and we get better here. And this is true. Webpack today is better, which is nice. But the cool thing is that the whole ecosystem relies on Webpack, which then means that it's going down into all the tools that are on top of that. I'm using Nuxt for my private stuff. This is super nice. And when you then look around, these tools today have a really nice abstraction. So and this is called toolkits. So when you look at these starters, for example, this is Create React app. React had the same problem. People wanted to write React, but they didn't know how, because the tooling is so hard to solve the problem. But now the React team is maintaining Create React app, which is a one-line installation. And Vue is doing the same, and Preact is doing the same. And you can start in just a few minutes, which is just beautiful, without figuring out how your Babel config should look like. And when you look at these kind of things, they all have only a single dependencies, which also means that you get all the update with one dependency, and not with 15. I think that's super nice. So when you want to learn more, there's this GitHub repository that lists the good toolkits. So when you choose a tool, it should just work initially, but then it should be very easy and powerful to configure later. Because at some point, Parcel may not do the job, because you need some special configuration. But this shouldn't appear in the first 3-6 months. But then we have also new automation tools, right? Let's talk about testing. I love writing end-to-end tests. Said no one ever. And there's actually a new tool out there that is called Cypress. Anyone has heard of Cypress? Excellent. So let's have a look at this. So I'm going to a different repository now. So what you see is my private website. And we can get rid of this one. And Cypress is a new project that is out there. It sits on top of Electron. And it comes with an application to write end-to-end tests. So when I, for example, now do Cypress open, it will kick off an Electron app. So Electron is this thing that powers Atom and Visual Studio Code, which is basically Chromium environment. And what you see here is that there's one project available, which is my private website. And this is one file. Here we go. And what you see here is that the window, I see the tests that are running here, and the difference to all the things that usually happen when you write end-to-end tests is, when this is loading, that this is a real browser window here. You can inspect and write tests right next to each other, right? I can inspect that, I can navigate around here. That's a lot of cool stuff. So when I want to write a test file, for example, this is a Cypress test file. When you write unit tests or end-to-end tests in JavaScript, you might be familiar with that. So I can just go here, say, visit this website, please. And then I can say, but let's make it the cool way, because I love that workflow, man. It's so nice. So I can move that just to the left. I move that to the right. And it's super responsive. So when I change this one now, here we go. That is nice. So let's write a test like say, get h1 should contain my name. Come on. Conference Wi-Fi. Here we go. So we have a green one. So let's just mess that up quickly. I've got a 98 Lighthouse score, so it's not my site. Come on. Okay, you have to trust me that it's getting red. 2 more seconds, come on. I'm not going further with that. All right, so this is Cypress. If you write end-to-end tests with something that you don't enjoy, give that a try. The head of engineering of Cypress is Gleb Bamutov. We know each other from the Twitter sphere, and we had a 30-minute screencast, and he told me how this whole thing works. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check that out. But it's not only about end-to-end testing, it's also about utilities. Recently, I had a discussion with our CMO at Contentful, and we published a blog post, and that included broken links. And I was like, man, can we check that before we hit publish, please? And then the CMO, which is interesting because I, as a developer, I said, can we add a manual check? And he said, well, let's automate that. So we flipped roles in this one. And does anyone remember Phantom.js? I was a huge fan of this. This is a headless WebKit thing. Unfortunately, it wasn't maintained anymore at some point because headless Chrome appeared. And the Chrome folks also are maintaining Puppeteer, which is basically an abstraction layer on Chrome. And with this, you can program Chrome for whatever you want to do. So when you look at this, all you have to do is you have to require Puppeteer, for example. Then I'm defining a URL. Then I'm using an async function. I'm spawning a new window. I'm waiting until all the network stuff is done, and then I'm closing it. So I'm going. Then there's this evaluation step, and this is now switching context. So what happens now here is that from a node environment, I'm switching into the website that I'm actually visiting here. So what I'm checking is I'm grabbing all the links that are in the website. You could now say, well, Stefan, you could figure out that with curl, which is not true when you have client-side rendering in place, right? So I'm grabbing all the links that may appear later, and then I'm just doing HTTP calls to see if all of them are answering with a 200. And then I'm filtering the whole things, and then that is our solution now. So filtering, looking for not 200s, and then saying, hey, you've got broken links. And this is in our ecosystem now. I've got a little node snippet. Whenever I publish something, this runs against our website. And it tells me when something has a 404. I think this is super nice. And when you go to the stuff that the Google folks maintain, there's also this Puppeteer examples, and there's super nice stuff in there. So you can analyze your assets. This is programmable Chrome. You get all the metrics that you're maybe interested in. You can do complete site graphs. You can see if your service worker is running correctly, right? Is it caching the right things? And one of my favorite scripts is this one. You can just spawn several windows next to each other and get all the metrics. So when I want to compare how my private website compares against my company, I can do that. Just automate that away, have a quick look. That is usually not a lot of code to write. So automate everything and spend your time with fun stuff. So let's talk about the last big buzzword, serverless. So Chris Coyer from CSS Tricks said, I've got 10 minutes left, the counter is still running. So you can take your front-end skills and do things that typically only a back-end developer can do. I think that is, yeah, that's accurate. Then there's also Daniel from Oslo. He says, I'm a JavaScript dev and everything is Legos. I think this is almost true, but it's not about JavaScript. It's basically about, we have a lot of tools in our tool belt today, and we don't have to reinvent everything. So when I start developing a product today, and first of all, I don't have to know how servers work, right? So I can use Google Cloud, AWS, or Azure. There's a lot of maintenance that these companies do for me already. But this is a little bit too low level for me. I'm a front-ender, right? So I use Netlify, which is a static site provider or static hoster. Then there's Site, which allows you to deploy node and functions. For content management, of course, I'm going with Contentful. For search, well, I go with Algolia. I worked in companies where we spent 3 sprints to make our search fast, and we're still slower than Algolia, which is ridiculous. So maybe I have some user management, which is Auth0, and yeah, of course, for sending SMS and communication stuff, you may want to use go with Twilio. So there's always a site for that. And today you can deploy your sites very, very easily. So when I started doing web development, what I did is, we had these static hosters, right? It was search and GitHub Pages appeared at some point, and everybody did Jekyll. These tools were missing one step, though. We had to bring in Circle CI or Travis, and then we had build steps running that pushed to the static host of our choices. Today we have Netlify, which is basically a static site hoster that gives you CDN, HTTP2, and all the nice goodies, including your CI pipeline. This is very, very nice. But when you talk about serverless, you have to talk about function as a service. So basically, functions as a service are just small JavaScript snippets that you can upload somewhere. I don't care where it's going, and then you don't have to maintain servers anymore because you can connect it to an HTTP endpoint maybe, and then you build your own APIs really quickly. So there are no servers to maintain. They automatically scale up. Maybe you have an API for Black Friday and it's hitting your servers hard. Nice. AWS Lambda will scale that and will do that for you. And when they're not running, you're not paying for these. So there's this little nifty web app, which is called Serverless Calc. So you can roughly estimate, okay, how much will this function run? So the time it runs, the duration it runs is the important part here. And then you can see, well, it will cost me $1 per month. I think we will have that probably. So when you write a JavaScript function here, oops, all you have to do is you define a function that returns something. So this is already a Lambda function. Congratulations. Nice, you're ready to go AWS Lambda. Then you have to configure something that is called API Gateway. Sounds horrible. I think this sounds way too complicated. But basically what this is just a mapping of a path and an HTTP verb to a function. So at the end, it's not too bad. And then I'm going with a little bit of JSON here because I want to be a good web citizen and return a proper status code. And when you want to deploy that somewhere and you go to AWS for the first time, this is what you get, right? I mean, I don't know how to deal with this. Eventually, you will find this function editor. It seriously took me 10 minutes to find where I can edit a function. And API Gateway. And they are in completely different places. So good luck with this one. This can be very tedious, but what I'm using today is the serverless framework, and it is so beautiful. It works with Google Cloud, AWS, Microsoft, and IBM. Then there's also Cloud.js, which is AWS only. But this is an abstraction on the top of this tedious configuration, which is super nice. So all you have to do with these kind of tools is you have to add another file, which is a configuration file, and I'm defining the environment I want to have, the function I want to execute, and where the path should be. Here we have my function, and then it's one command. And I'm just API orchestrator, right? I mean, what is going on? So this is now uploading to S3. And just 30 seconds later, I just developed my own API HTTP endpoint. And since then, I have to speed up a little bit because I'm running out of time. And since then, I have serverless weekends. Which is like, a few days ago, I was talking to a friend, and every developer had to build a URL shortener in his or her career, right? So I did this. So this is a redirect function. So I'm catching everything with try catch and give a 500 if anything goes wrong. Then I'm using Contentful, of course, because this is what I work for, which defines key value pairs, like the long URL and the short URL. And HTTP get there is good enough. Then I'm doing some parsing of the response, and then I'm returning a status code 301. Which results in this. I mean, that's not a lot of JavaScript. And yes, I bought the domain mylinksonline. You can also schedule a serverless function, which means that I'm building bots now. So this is a random MDN bot that tweets documentation every 6 hours. Random documentation. I'm enjoying that pretty much. So, and I have access to our big AWS account, right? Contentful is running on AWS completely. And the thing is, though, when I deployed my first function in AWS, with the access I had, the sysadmin came to me, Stefan, how did you configure API gateway? When he asked me that question, I didn't even know what this was. But the thing is that he didn't give me enough access to be dangerous anyways, which is super cool. He had several alarms in place and was like, yeah, go mad, dude. Do whatever you want. So that's super nice. So and then the power of all the things when you're dealing with a lot of services is that you should be able to connect all the dots. And this is where webhooks come into play. Webhooks are basically the API of the web. And what I use functions for too is, for example, at Contentful, we've got a Discourse forum and a Slack integration. Discourse has a Slack integration. Unfortunately, we are one of these companies that have 2 Slack orgs, a private one and a public one. So what do I do to kind of bring data from one place to the other? Well, I define myself a Lambda function, right? And I push it back to Slack. Pushing data into Slack is not that hard. And then I'm distributing it wherever I want. So in writing a discourse or a function that does that is just, it is parsing whatever comes into the webhook. That is an HTTP call that I define in discourse, hitting whatever endpoint I want. And then I'm sending it back to Slack. And this is it. Nice. This took me an hour or 2 to build. This is super, super beautiful. And now I'm ready to distribute all the kind of things. And guess what? I put my link checker with Chrome into a function too. So I can hit a URL with another URL and spins up Chrome in the cloud to figure out if I've broken links somewhere. Just write a Lambda function. I think that's super, super nice. And I'm skipping something because I'm running overtime the other way. Cool. So what I want to tell you is spend your time building a business and not reinventing the wheel. When you do, for example, I don't know, I would never even think of figuring out how to do payment or SMS, right? But for certain things, people build the same things. How often have you built a login mechanism? I cannot even count how many times I did that. It's just wasting time. If you're interested in learning more what is out there, there's this really nice resource that is called The Power of Serverless for Front-End Developers. I don't think that it's for front-end developers only. I think it's for everybody. There are so cool services out there with generous free plans that you can start today and just, man, when you want to bootstrap a company, it should be online in a month or a few weeks. You shouldn't start inventing things. So and also then there's these kind of things. This is CodePen, which you may know when you're a front-end developer. And CodePen now also has projects. So the whole thing, the website that I showed you before is that it's developed in CodePen, deployed to CodePen, and it's all in one circle, all running in the cloud. I think that's nice. So my wish or what I also see is that new awareness is popping up. So we all use Google Lighthouse now. This is a monitoring tool that comes with the Chrome folks. But then there's WebHint.io. This is done by Microsoft. This doesn't get the love it deserves. This is the most picky, tedious tool ever out there. And I tried to do my best, and it has 100 hints for me. So if you want to have a tool that screams at you how bad you're doing, this is your tool. But it's super nice. So let's all build great products. So my last wish for the future is that we finally figure this out. Right? Web components are in the making since I'm a web developer, which is 8 years. So, but we now have the custom element spec. This is how it looks. You can an HTML element like that. Then you can define the behavior. And man, the support is there. It's not too bad. And then finally, hopefully, we can not have 3 date pickers on NPM, but please, let's do this. Let's have 1 date picker, right? And then there are already frameworks on top of that. So let's please all bet on our platform. I will go 1 minute overtime. So how to stay up to date? Newsletters are the obvious ones. I collect my private ones, my preferred ones here. But the first one, if you're not checking Web Platform News, Zimvidas, oh, it's too good. This is one of my favorite resources out there. GitHub, of course. If you want to see where the browsers are going, you can watch that. You will get notifications about browser support in real time, not in real time, but in your inbox. Then MDN decided to put their compatibility data on GitHub too. And what I had to do usually is that I set up emails for new releases on GitHub. Finally, we can watch releases only on GitHub since 2 days. This makes my day. And then there's Chrome Status, which is a progressive web app. I also get push notification when Chrome ships a new feature. So we see there that the layout jank API is coming. So to sum the whole thing up, I think front-end development is really challenging today. Don't worry about falling behind. What James said is very, very true. Use the right tools, be happy with it, and roll with it. You cannot just be always cutting edge. That's not possible. Just use what works for you. And I wish you all a great day.